Hello and welcome to video number 37 in the MegaMan series. In this video we're going to be creating another enemy, and this one is Gabyoall. So Gabyoall is a little robot, a patroller bot I guess you could say, that will basically travel back and forth along a path, and if it happens to encounter the ground it'll turn directions, or into a wall it'll turn directions as well. And as you can see, shooting it has no effect on it. Being on the same platform, it actually increases its speed to chase MegaMan, and what you need to use is a more powerful weapon to be able to kill it, which you'll see here by using the Hyper Bomb. And it's dead. So we're going to build that guy today, so let's get started. So I have the previous project open right now. If you didn't watch the previous video, number 36 on the damage overrides, you may want to watch that one first, because this enemy makes use of that. As you saw, bullets don't kill it, so we need to override it so that bullets basically do no damage to it and will just suspend it instead. So you can implement your own solution, but if you don't want to do that, you can always watch the previous video and then you'll be up to speed before you get into this one. So if you have been following on, open up your project. If not, then all the source code is up online on my GitHub. Links in the description, so you can go get all the assets and everything. There's only going to be a couple things, which is the enemy sprite sheet, which we've been using for this whole video series, and the audio clips and whatever other scripts are associated, like the enemy controller, etc. So that said, we're going to get going. I'm going to move this out of the way. So the first thing we're going to do is we're just going to grab those sprites out of that sheet. So we're going to go into the graphics folder and go to the enemies file and then do the editor. So this little guy comes in two colors, orange and blue. So we're going to cut these out first, and we're going to do that and I'll come right back. Okay, after you select all your sprites, you're going to want to put the pivot down here in the bottom center, and then you can name them whatever you want, or you can leave it by default. I just named them the name and then orange 1, and this one's orange 2, and then I call this one blue 1 and blue 2, and the pivots are all at the bottom center. So we're going to apply that, and we're going to move on. So what we're going to do is, since this is the previous video, I'm going to our previous project, I'm going to disable Sniper Joe, and then we're going to create a new game object, and I'm going to reset the transform on this, and this is going to be on the enemy tag and the enemy layer, and this one's going to be Gabyoall, or however it's pronounced. Save that, and we're going to just change the scale to 1.5 because it's been doing with all the other enemies. And then we're going to go into our scripts because we need to add on the enemy controller script. So scripts and enemies, and then we're going to drag on the enemy controller. So with that set, then what we'll do is we're going to leave it on the dynamic rigid body, even though there's no vertical movement, but we're going to use velocities to move them around. So we're going to change the collision to continuous, the sleeping to never, and we're going to lock the Z on it. And the sprite, we're going to use the very first one, which is the blue 1, just so we can set something to this object. So we're going to drag that over. Let me bring this screen over first, over here, so you can see what's going on. So just like that. Okay. So we're going to put it on layer 10 like all of our other enemies. And we're going to change the box collider size. But first let's just reset it so it brings it in. And on the X and the Y size, we're going to take off 0.02. So that first one's going to be 0.14. And then the Y is going to be 0.06. So then you can see it. 0.06. So it brings in the 1 pixel all around. And then on the enemy controller, this if you go look up on Fandom or wherever else the information is, this guy's actually worth 300 points. So 300 has a health of 1. Contact damage is going to be 3. So if MegaMan touches him, he's going to get 3 taken away. No bullet damage or speed. And then we're going to set the bonus type to random. Ball color was default to blue. The rest this is fine. The damage audio clip is going to be number 9 for enemy damage. And then the prefab for the explosion, which is in our prefabs folder. And then up there, effects. And we're going to use explode effect number 1, the small explosion. And we'll do the damage override part later. So let's just start with this just to get this kind of going. So we'll save that. Next, what we're going to do is, I'm just get this out of the way. We need to add on the hitbox. So we're going to right click on the enemy and we're going to create another empty. And this one's going to be called hitbox. And the layer is going to be default. We're not tagging this one. And then we're going to add on a box collider. And I'm just going to go and grab the previous box colliders settings. So you can go over there, right click on it, and then do a copy component. Go to your hitbox, right click on that one, and paste the values. But you're going to make this one a trigger. So this is going to detect whether MegaMan's touching them or not. So then we're going to add on another child. Now these children, we're going to be adding on 2. These are going to be the checks for detecting whether there's a ground underneath and whether there's a wall in front. So we're going to be using raycasts to do that. So we need these, basically these objects with transforms so we can basically know where we're going to project our rays out. So first one, we're going to be calling it ground check. And transform position, but before we do position, we're just going to add on a gizmo here, just a little yellow one. And the X on that is going to be 0.08. And this one, see there's a green name bit on me. It's going to be called ground check. And I'm going to duplicate that, so we're going to Control D on that. And then this one, we're going to call it wall check. And wall check, it's also default, and I probably, yep. Just make sure that layer is on default, and wall check. And in this one, we're going to put the Y. It's going to be the same X, but the Y is going to be about 0.08. Now, if I bring this over, you're going to see this is basically where it's going to be projecting from. So over here and down here. So we're going to have a ray that's going to be going down here, looking for a ground, and we're going to have a ray here going out in front of it, looking for a wall. Now, even though our ground in this series, the ground and the walls basically use the same layer, which is ground, that's fine. I'm going to get to that later. So let's save, because I love to save every second. And then what we're going to do then is, let's go create the script real quick. So we're going to go into our scripts folder, enemies. I'm going to right click in here. I'm going to create a new C# script, the enemy name controller, and I'll just give it a sec for it to think. Finish with that, and then we'll attach that later. But now that the basics for the enemy, other than we're going to do the animations now, the basics for the enemy have been set up. So we have our box collider set up, our rigid body is set up, the sprite, which is basic, is set up. Our enemy controller, for the most part, is set up because we're going to add on the damage override after everything else is done. So what we're going to do then is we're going to go into our animations, enemies, and create a new folder with the enemy name. I'm just going to call it Gabby from now on. And in here we're going to right click, we're going to create a new Animator Controller. Name it the enemy name or whatever you want, and then we're going to create a new animation, call it whatever you want, or I'm going to call it the enemy name. Double click on the controller, and then go back over to project, highlight the animation, and we're going to link the animation to the controller with the from selected clip. So now that we have that, we're going to, because this enemy has different colors, we're going to be using the animator override, the controller override. So we're going to create one of those. So right click and then select the animator override controller. And this one is going to be based on the colors. So that one's going to be called the blue. and then I'm going to create an animation of the same name. Alright, so now the animations are going to be set at a sample of 16. And these are going to have looping, so we're going to do the loop time, because if you notice on the little enemy, this little part actually flickers, or actually down here, this actually flickers, goes on and off, so you can see it's got some life to it. And then now, we're going to go to our override here, we're going to drag on the original controller, and then we're going to drag on our override animation, which is the blue one. And we're going to bounce around a little bit. So we're going to go to our enemy. We're going to drag on the override blue so we can set the actual sprites in there. Let's just zoom in here. So we're going to go to our graphics folder. Let's see here. And we're going to go to start with the blue. So we're going to put blue 1. Let's just expand that. And then we're going to do blue 2. So it's just 2 frames to this animation. And it's just going to go between them the whole time, back and forth, back and forth. So now we're going to go back over to the animations and Gabby folder. We're going to create another override. Now this one's going to be for the, actually no, you don't have to do that. What we're going to do, we'll just duplicate the blue one. So we're going to duplicate that blue override. We're going to name it orange. Then we're going to duplicate the blue animation, and we're going to name that one orange. And then we're going to go to the override here. It's going to be the same controller, but we're going to change the animation to the orange one. There. So then we're going to go back to the enemy here, and we're going to bring over the override orange so we can change the sprites for the orange. And then go back to graphics. And here. So we're going to put orange 1 there, and then orange 2 there. And then we're going to just go back to the animations, and we're going to just put the default controller on the animator, and then we're going to save that. So now if we actually check these, it should have loop time, it should be 16, it should be orange, 16, and blue. Okay, cool. So then what we're going to do is we're going to do the code part. So if we go over to the scripts and enemies folder, you're going to open up your Gabby controller. And right now I don't have anything in it, so I'm actually going to go and paste the contents in there. So I'll be back in 1 second. Okay, so first thing we're going to do though is we're going to edit the player controller. We're going to add a new public function here that's going to basically return our grounded status. So we need to know whether our player is grounded, because that's going to determine whether Gabby's going to speed up or not. So inside your player controller, you can throw this wherever you want inside of there, but we're going to basically add this in here, and all it's going to do is return the value of our isGrounded bool. So we're going to put that in there, save that, and then we're going to go over to the actual Gabby controller. So it's pretty simple. I'll explain bit by bit as we go through it what everything is all about. So first thing, we need all of our components here that we're going to need access to, so we put all those in. We need to make a reference to our player, so that's a game object. There's going to be 2 bools here. First one is stunned. That's going to be our flag or controlled variable, knowing whether to stay suspended or not. So is Gabby stunned or is she not, or is he not? And then our is facing right, because there is a difference if you look at the actual graphic. Hold on a sec, it's crunching. This shadow actually, or this highlight is actually facing one way or the other. Otherwise, yeah, it looks basically identical. But the highlight from the light is basically, your left or your right. Plus the fact that our raycasts need to flip on the transform so that they all go in the direction that we're moving. So that's another reason why we're going to be using that. And so then we're going to have our speed and our stun timer, and these are basically variables that we can set because we don't want to mess with the originals, which are down here. And then the direction that we're moving is a vector 2. and then the enable AI, whether artificial intelligence is working or not. So you'll start looking around for MegaMan. Then we have some floats here. Patrol speed, which is basically the slow speed, so I have that set to 1. And then I have the chase speed, so if MegaMan happens to be in the line of sight on the ground, then it's going to move faster, so it's going to move twice the speed of the patrol speed. That'll be chase speed. And then when it gets hit by the bullet, that's the stun, so I'm going to just do that at 3 seconds. So that's 3F. Search distance. Now, search distance, if we come and look at this, what we're going to do is we're going to project a ray from the center, and we're going to have a ray going to the right and a ray going to the left looking for the player. And if the player touches that ray, that's when we're going to know to go to our chase speed. So that's the length of the ray that we're going to be casting from the center out. So it's going to be 3. And this player hit point Y. I'll get to that when we actually finish with the code and everything like that. But there's some circumstances which I haven't seen it in the game, but you may want to account for it. If the player happens to be on the same platform, I guess you could say, as the enemy, then no problem. They'll move back and forth, players, and then unless it jumps and it doesn't touch the ray. However, what if you have a block that's a little bit lower, but maybe it hits the player's chest or the player's head? Should the enemy still move fast at that point? Well, we're going to take that into account, and that's what this is about. So then we have the audio clip, the damage clip. So once the enemy gets hit by the bullet, it's going to play this sound. And then these are references to our ground check and our wall check transforms. And then this is just the color stuff of the Animator Controller overrides, and then our direction stuff here. And so in the wake, we just get all the components and save them in variables that we can access. In the start here, all of our sprites are facing right by default, but if we want to change our move direction by starting to move left, then we're going to want to flip all that stuff around. We're going to initialize the speed to whatever the patrol speed is, and then our stun timer to the stun delay, which is 3 seconds by default. And then we're going to set the color, and then we're going to get a reference to the player so we can do that grounded check. And so inside of fixed update, I'm going to basically have these two functions here, ground wall check and player check, so kind of keep it separate and cleaned up. So it's just going to call these over and over inside of fixed update. So before we get to the regular update, let's just go check these out first one by one. So ground wall check. Ground wall check. So this is the length of the ray it's going to be casting out. So remember, if we look at this, we have these two transforms here. So this one's going to be projecting out that value a little to the right, and then the other one's going to be using that value, that length, and then going down. So we're looking for the ground down here, or the absence of the ground actually, and we're looking for a wall up here. So if there were walls encountered. So what we're looking for is the ground. Like I said, the wall and the grounds are basically, I use the same layer for both of those, but if you have different ones, you might want to put those in here and then use them on your layer mask. So we project two rays. First one's the ground raycast, and then the wall raycast. And so with the ground, we're using vector down, so it's going to be shooting that ray downward. And then what we're going to do with the wall, though, is we're going to use whatever our direction is. So if the enemy happens to be traveling right, we're going to want to project it right. If the enemy happens to be traveling left, then we're going to want to project it in that direction, so in the same distance. And then what I do here is I just draw those little rays, which we'll see in magenta. And basically, I do it before here because we can actually flip, and we don't want it to do it, draw them in the wrong direction. So we want to draw them before we end up maybe changing direction. And so what we're going to do here is we're looking to see if we've hit anything. So for the ground to change direction, we want to see if we don't hit a ground. So if there's no ground below, that's a reason that we should flip direction and go the opposite way. However, if we hit a wall, which it's not null, then that's our reason for turning around as well. So if there's no ground, we want to change direction, or if there is a wall, then we want to change direction. So those are the two conditions for flipping our direction. And then if that is the case, then we're going to basically change is facing right to the opposite, flip the controller, and then change our direction. the vector direction. So that's the ground and wall check. The player check, by default, we're going to be using our patrol speed, our slow speed, and then what we're going to be looking for is the ground and the player. Now, the reason I include the ground is if you have something, maybe you have a wall between the two of them, and that wall happens to be obviously on the ground layer, or you might want to add whatever layers that you consider ground. So if the ray hits the ground first and the player's behind it, obviously we want to register that first, because unless you want your enemy to be able to see through walls. But if it hits the ground first, then it shouldn't see the player yet, and therefore not change its speed. So we're going to be checking for both of these, and if the player happens to be nothing, no ground layers in front of it, then we're going to be, checking, hitting that, and then we'll change speed based off of that. So this is where I was saying before. So from the center of the enemy, we're going to basically the origin, which is basically the center of the sprite. We're going to cast based on search distance, which is 3. We're going to go 1 to the left and 1 to the right. So from the center, we're going to have 2 different rays going in both directions. And it's a really long direction because we don't want any, the player to be, not seen right away. Now in the original game, you'll notice that, if the enemy goes out of the screen, it disappears. It actually gets removed out of the scene, and then if it comes back, if you go back to that same area, then it'll get put back in. Well, in our game right now, it doesn't do that. So we're going to make really long rays to keep looking on the platforms that we're basically on. And so we shoot out these 2 raycasts, and then we're going to use this function I have down here to clean it up and keep it a little more compact to check and see if the raycast hit for the player. So we're going to check both of those, and then we just draw out the rays so you can use it, see it for debugging. Now down here in the player raycast hit function, we're going to check and see if the player isn't null, which shouldn't be, but if the player happens to die for some reason during this whole event, we don't want to start moving fast. And then the raycast collider hits, so if the ground or the player is hit, then we want to see. And then what we're going to do then is we're going to see, well, what did we hit? Did we hit the player? So if we hit the player, we're going to see where we hit the player. And so what we're going to use is this inverse transform point to get the point where the ray hit the player. And that's basically going to give us that Y value, and where we have set up for player hit point Y. So if the player happens to be at that same height level that we're looking for, then it should be considered that it's close enough to being on the same platform or whatever, and I'm going to move fast. And so that's what we're going to check for there. And then we're also going to use that function that we added, is grounded. And so if both of those conditions are hit, then we're going to change our speed to chase speed. So it's going to be moving twice as fast to try and get the player. So that's with all the raycasting that we're going to be checking on. So then up here in our regular update, we're going to be looking to see, the freeze enemy. We've done this in others. Nothing special about that. It just waits until, it's unfrozen. Then we're going to see if an AI is enabled. We're going to be checking, is the enemy stunned? If the enemy is stunned, we're not going to move, so we're going to set the velocity to nothing. Then we're going to basically decrement our stun timer, and then once it gets down to 0 or equal to 0, we're going to call our method here called stun, and pass it false, which basically means not stunned anymore, so we can start moving again. But if we're not stunned, then we're just going to move at the direction and the speed and use that as the velocity to move back and forth. And then down here is just some basic other stuff. So enable AI method, set color. This is stuff that we've used before. So we get the color, set it in here, and then we call this and we set the Animator Controller to actually do the color. And then our stun. So inside of stun, I'm going to have this parameter here called stun, and we're going to default it to true. So if you don't pass anything, it'll just assume you want to do stun. You want to stun the enemy. And then if it's stunned, we're going to set is stun to true, reset the stun delay, set the animator speed to 0. So depending on which frame it's on, it's either going to show that little white area at the bottom, or it's not, depending on which where it gets paused at. And then we're going to play the damage clip. And then if it's not stunned, we're going to set not that, and we're going to reset the animator speed back to 1. So pretty simple enemy, pretty easy creating. So that's the code for our enemy in this one. So if we go back over to here, I'm going to move this out of the way, and then we're going to go back over to our game object here that we created. We're going to drag on our controller that we just were going through. So here's all the properties set, except we have to basically drag some other things in here. Like the damage audio clip, that's going to be the enemy damage number 9. Then we did the ground check, which is this object right there. And then we need the transform of the wall check, which is this one. We're going to default to blue. Then we need the animators, the overrides. So we need the blue one. And then we need the orange one. And that is basically set here. So now here comes the damage override part. So like I said, if you haven't watched the previous video, you might want to do that. Or if you don't care if your enemy gets gets hit by a bullet, then you don't need this part. But if you do, and you want to try and make it as close to the original as you can, then we're going to need an override. So we're going to set that value to 1, and we're going to ignore the ignore invincibility, because this enemy doesn't have invincibility. And so what we're going to say is we're going to set our damage value to 0 when it gets hit by a bullet. So when a bullet hits the enemy, and then then we're going to do the event. So we need an event for that. So the event is actually in our enemy. So you're going to drag over the game object, and then we're going to go to our controller here, and we're going to call our stun. And then we're going to put a check for yes. So stun, yes. And so what this is basically going to do is when this enemy gets hit by a bullet, and we're not going to apply any damage amount, so it's going to override the default damage amount and set it to 0. So like our bullets are set to 1, well this is going to basically override that value and make it 0. And then what it's going to do, it's going to call our stun function. So our enemy will get stunned and get suspended for those 3 seconds. And it's going to play that audio clip that we set. Not this one, but the one down here, even though they're the same thing. So that is basically how I end up creating this enemy. So now what we're going to do is we're going to make a prefab out of it. So I'm going to go over to my enemies here. Let's just drag this over. I'm going to drag it in here. Boom. So there's my prefab. Now it's here. Let's just drag this up to here. And we're going to bring the scene back over. We're going to move the position of this guy. So I'm actually going to bring him over here. And 1 second. So I'm going to reposition him. We're going to put him at 11 point, and this is going to be an ugly number. I should have rounded it, but whatever. You can put it wherever you want. So I'm going to put it there so you can see it's over here. Now I'm going to change the Y on it to negative 0.106, so it's right on the ground. And then, so it's like that. And then what we're going to do is also going to change our search distance. The 3 brings it to about here-ish, but I want to cover this entire area. But you also have to remember, if this enemy gets all the way over here, then the left search distance is going to basically be, it's going to stop somewhere over there. So that's why I'll extend it out to 5, so it covers this whole platform regardless if it's at whichever end it's at. So, or I think it covers either that or it's like the whole, as close as it can. You can increase it to whatever you want or decrease it. It's up to you. So I'm going to save those changes. We're going to play this. I'm just going to mute the audio for right now. So I'm going to come in here and check this guy out. So right now, I'm going to pause it right there. So now, if you look at this, you're going to see, okay, so here is my ground check, raycast, and then up in here is my wall check raycast. I don't know why it's like all the way over there. It's kind of weird, right? Because it brings it in. It still works, right? You may want to extend that from 0.025 like I did, maybe a little bit more, but it's up to you. I was testing it out. We can actually step through this and you can see that it gets really, as soon as it sees it right away, it turns direction. And then this big long, which is actually 2, see this here, these, you can't really tell, but from the center here, you see this big long magenta ray here, and then one going in the opposite direction. That's our search distance. So as it goes back and forth, it's going to be looking for MegaMan. And if MegaMan happens to be up here and jump up and hits this ray, well, I'm not going to be grounded. That's first check. So it's not going to increase the speed. So just keep that in mind. So I'm going to come in here so we can look at this. And actually, to make it easier to see this, or to see what we're looking for, we're going to go to our grounds here and go to this number 4. You can't really see it, but the corner of the ground on this platform here is right here. So that when the ray gets past that for the ground check, it says, oh, there's no more ground. I should change direction. So I'm going to unpause it, and you see, boom, turn around. So actually, you know what? I'm going to wait for it to come back. We're going to step it. So that. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to step it. Boop, 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 boop. Here's the corner right there, and here's the ray. Beep, boop, and you see, boom. Change direction. I've got no more ground, so now I'm going to go the other way. So now what I'm going to do, so that's our ground check. But what we also should check for is our wall. So I'm going to duplicate this box here. We're going to make this box ground. So I'm going to change this to the, actually before I do, I want you to see. So there's no ground there, so it's just stopping. It's still trying to go forward because it's like, I don't know what's in front of me because it's looking for a ground. So I'm going to change that to ground. So say no on that. And you saw, boom, change direction. So if I actually put it there, so that's the wall check, or in this case, the wall ground layer as a wall check. So now you can see both of those work. Now we're going to bring this over. I'm going to bring this down. And so what I'm going to do, I'm going to jump ahead. Now we're going to look for me. So you can see the ray here. I'm going to jump up, and enemy's ignoring me because I'm not touching the ground, right? So I'm going to go up there. Oop, that was increasing speed. Now I'm on the ground. I'm on the ground, and the ray is, I'm colliding with the raycast. So you can see that? So that's the speed. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to bring this up, and you can see this is the hit point Y that I'm talking about. So because I'm on the same level, per se, as this ray, it doesn't know about this, obviously, unless it's coming over here to change direction, but I'm on the same height as this. So that's what we want to do. So if you happen to be like that, let's say you have a step to get up to something higher, we want to ignore the fact that I'm lower than that. At least, I don't know. I haven't come across any parts in the game. There might be, I don't know. But I haven't seen any where you're in a situation like this where you're on a little bit lower of a platform, and then the enemy's like right there and sees like the top of your head. And if you saw on the original, when I was jumping, there's the ground check, but when I was jumping and if the ray hit me in the head, it still thought, okay, I'm not going to increase patrol speed or anything like that. So, but in this case, we want it to, because I'm on basically the same height as the enemy. So now what I'm going to do is we're going to check out that stun, which has to do with the damage override. So let's wait for him. And you can see, this is where we probably want some audio. So let me just do this real quick because the music kind of, it's on my nerves. I should probably take it out. That's in their sounds. Sound manager. I'm going to get rid of I'm just going to put this at 0 for now. Turn this. Okay, so now we're going to listen to it. You can see I can shoot this guy all day long if I want. He's not going anywhere. He's stunned for 3 seconds. 3 seconds. Stun, 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 stun. So that's our damage override. Normally the bullet should kill him because his damage is 1. I mean, I guess I could make it 1,000,000, but I think it's more appropriate to actually have an override for that. Now the next thing I want to do is this one little bit here. We're going to make sure that he actually dies. So I'm going to duplicate that box. I'm going to put it up here. Let's just make it a ground. No, we're going to trap him in here right now. So I'm going to go to my guy here, and I am going to give myself the hyper bomb because that's the only other weapon I have that I can use to kill somebody. So I'm going to hit enter. I'm going to go to my hyper bomb, and I'm going to toss my bomb. So he should basically die now. And he did. So he's not immune to the bomb, but he's immune to the bullet. So that's the damage override. So anyway, that brings us to the end of the video. Hope you found it useful. That's another enemy. That's actually the last enemy I'm going to be doing for the series, because I'm going to be building my attempt at replicating the Bomb Man stage, and that was the last enemy I needed to basically build that stage out. I'm going to do other enemies little by little, but for the mainstream, pretty much every week video, that was the last one for the enemies. Other ones will come out whenever I have time, whenever I feel like it. So if you found it useful, give it a thumbs up. I always appreciate that. If you haven't subscribed, subscribe. There's only about 3 more videos in this series. The next one is actually going to be on ladders. Ooh, that one's actually, I tell everybody, I hate ladders. If ladders are the most temperamental, difficult thing in building these things. And it's not so much when you're on the ladder, it's when you get to the top or when you get to the bottom. That's really where it gets touchy. And so I've been working on it. I finally got a working model that I basically have been hammering with testing and everything like that, and I haven't got it to break yet. So I think I finally have a winner. It's my 3rd round at developing a ladder system and looking at everybody else's solutions, but just to get ideas of what I might be missing or whatever. But we're going to get to that in the next video. Anyway, so stay safe out there. I'll catch you at the next video. Bye.